Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you're doing well and welcome to another solarfallbaits video. So in this one we're going to be making something a little bit more cartoony and fun. And I've always wanted to make a baby shark and yeah, no, I'm not gonna sing the song. I think I already did that on the previous Megalodon shark video that I did a year ago. So I think the quota for baby shark's song is met. But I don't know, I might bust it out at some point during the video. Haven't decided yet. But yeah, anyways, as you can see, this is going to be fairly a fat version. Some might call this thick as hell. And yeah, let's just jump right into it. And I'm going to be showing you how to make this cool, fun little baby shark wake bait. Alrighty, so I've already headed down to the garage and started cutting the outlines of my shark wake bait, and the wood that I used for this project is going to be basswood. That's usually the one of the first questions that I get asked, what wood I use. So this one is basswood. Normally I would have used probably maple for this, but I didn't have a thick enough piece and I just didn't feel like gluing two pieces together this time around, so basswood it is. So now that I have the shape cut out with the bandsaw, I can start getting rid of that extra fat that I left there. It's just because I'm not really good at following the lines usually, so I usually tend to leave a little bit of extra there. Just because it's much easier to take out stuff than add it in. This next part shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who has seen my stuff before, where I drill the eye socket pilot hole with the drill press. I just find it much more easier to do it at this point rather than doing it later. It's just, yeah, makes more sense when everything is nice and blocky. Alright, next I'm going to determine the middle point of this lure, and I'm going to be using this triangle ruler to do that. Now that I have the halfway point marked, I am going to start marking out where the joint is going to be. And I'm just going to be using this marker to do that. And this time around, I am not going to make any kind of an angle on these joints, at least not yet. Alright, so now that we still have the lure in a blocky state, it's a really good time to do the joint cuts. And I have this 2x4 in the back of the saw to help me align the cut a little bit more straighter. I'm pretty decent when it comes to cutting straight with a handsaw, but you know, having that extra insurance is never a bad thing. Alrighty, so next I'm gonna start making the upper profiles template, and I usually just do this by folding a piece of paper in half that has been measured to be the correct length of the lure that I'm making, and then I will just basically just sketch out the outlines of the desired shape that I want to have on the lure, and for this one it'll be pretty thick. Alright, next here I'm going to be measuring the thickness of the lure that I'm making at the moment. And I just make these kind of guidelines for myself so that I know not to go over those lines. Now that I have the borderlines marked in this piece of paper, I'm just going to start sketching out the profile that I want for this lure. And as I said before, this is going to be a pretty thick lure, so the outlines or the sketch will reflect exactly that. So yeah, let's keep it nice and juicy. So now I will just fold the piece of paper in half again, and I will cut out the outline, and that will give me a perfectly symmetrical template to work with. Sometimes it might be a little bit tricky to get the template to stay in place, so I usually always tape it down. Alrighty, next on the list of things to do is I'm going to start making the lip slot. And it'll be one of those hidden lip slot style lures that I've made on the channel previously. And usually what I do is I start by making a small little mark on the side here where I want the lip to start. And then I will just use the correct thickness of Lexan that I want to make the lips out of, and use that as a kind of a guide to mark out the guidelines for me before I start sawing anything out. Alrighty, next I'm going to cut the lip slot, and the easiest and the fastest way I thought to go about this would be just to use my bandsaw. And of course you could use your table saw, but you would have to make a jig and adjust the correct angles and all that, and I didn't have time or the energy to do that. But since this is kind of a boring segment, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you guys who have been subscribing and supporting the channel throughout the years. I actually just realized that it's my 13th year on YouTube and going on 14th next year, which is kind of crazy to think about that I've been doing this for that long and still getting some pretty decent views for a kind of a niche topic as lure making is. So thank you very much for your support. I really do appreciate that. Alright, so now that the lip slot is cut, I'm just going to actually make it slightly bigger because I noticed that the 3mm thick Lexan polycarbonate sheet that I plan to use for the lips here is a little bit too snug for this slot, so I'm just going to make it slightly bigger. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is going to be one of those hidden lip slot configurations. And for that I need to mark first where the lip is going to start. And I'm going to try to be as symmetrical here as I possibly can, because that'll have effects on the action of the lure potentially, or at least when it comes to tuning the lure. But anyways, I'm going to then glue 2 pieces of wood on each side, made from the same exact basswood as the lure is, so I can make them appear pretty flush. And yeah, that'll be our hidden lip slot. To attach the pieces of wood into this hidden lip slot, in the beginning I thought that I would use super glue, but then I realized, you know what, basswood is one of those woods that really sucks in all of the moisture, and I bet that will happen with this really runny super glue as well. So I better use something else. So instead I used 5-minute epoxy. Once the 5-minute epoxy had cured enough, I shaved off the excess wood. And actually what I forgot to mention earlier is that when I made these small little pieces, they actually have the grain of the wood going exactly the same direction as it goes on the lure itself. So it's kind of one of those OCD things that a lot of woodworkers do. I don't know, it doesn't really probably matter that much, but I just wanted to do it on this one. And now we're back to the bandsaw. Surprise, surprise. So now I'm just going to cut off the excess and expose the upper profile. And I bet you already know what's gonna happen next. Yeah, we're gonna head back to the belt sander and disc sander and make everything nice and smooth. Next I'm gonna start shaping the lure, and this one is gonna be slightly more angular than what I would normally make, because it has that pretty significant looking lateral line that goes pretty much across the body of the shark. And even though this is not going to be super realistic, I just wanted to add that in here because it's kind of a prominent feature. So the cross section that I'm aiming for here for this particular shark lure is going to be kind of like a fat diamond, a lack of a better word, but that's kind of what I'm aiming for here. And I'm just using my trusty chisel to take off the excess wood, and I just really enjoy using chisels on a soft wood like basswood here. It's just a joy to use. And I think that's what lure making is supposed to be about. It's about being creative and just using the tools, whatever gives you the most joy. I mean, this is supposed to be fun, right? It doesn't really matter what tools you use. At the end of the day, as long as you get the job done, who cares, right? Alrighty, now that I have the shape pretty much dialed in, I can start doing my least favorite part of lure making, which is sanding, and especially hand sanding. And I'm sure that many of you out there can relate to this, that it kind of sucks. I can't sugarcoat it. It does kind of suck. But it does help if you kind of zone out and listen to some good music, for example, and just go on autopilot. Or what you could also do is listen to some podcasts, for example. So now that I'm finished with all the sanding, I'm gonna start making the fins. And here you can see kind of like a mock-up of where they're supposed to be and what their shape is going to be. And yeah, I'm gonna be using 3mm Lexan polycarbonate sheet for the fins. And first, I'm just going to mark on the lure itself where they're gonna start and where they're gonna end, and we're gonna start making the fins. So obviously now that I have drawn all of the fins on this piece of polycarbonate sheet, I need to cut them out. And of course, again, unfortunately, this is slightly boring to watch, so I will just probably speed things up considerably to make this go a little bit faster. Now that I have all the fins cut, there's a couple of them that are actually identical, or they're supposed to be identical. So I'm going to make sure that they are, and I'm going to glue them together with their other halves and work on them as one piece. I figured the easiest and the safest way to work on these pieces would be to just clamp them in a vise and work on them with my Dremel tool. Once I worked on the profile to my liking, I'm just going to part the two pieces now, and I'm just going to do that by prying the two pieces apart with a knife. And now retrospectively looking at this clip on the editing table, I probably should have used a different type of knife to pry these things open, because this is one of those snap-off blades, but it did work, so I think it's alright. My idea for the fins was to make them kind of more aerodynamic, if that makes any sense. I mean, I just wanted to make them look a little bit more rounder, so that's exactly what I'm going to be doing next. The last touches that I did for the fins was to hand sand them by hand. And as you already know, this is not my favorite thing to do, but I did do a pretty quick job with Grit 80 sandpaper, so it wasn't that bad. after I hand sanded the fins, I was ready to move on to something else, and I decided to start working on the head details. So first things first, I'm going to drill the eye sockets. Unlike any of my previous projects, this shark actually doesn't have too many carved details to it, but there are some, and I'm gonna start with the mouth first. Because this lure doesn't have too many details, I need to be extra careful with the alignment of the mouth. So I need to make sure that both sides are matching each other. And after that, I need to kind of do a little bit of hand sketching because the template that I have doesn't actually extend to the other side of the mouth. So now that I have the starting point for the mouth, I'm going to connect both sides just by freehanding it with a pencil. Alright, next I'm going to start giving the mouth a little bit more three-dimensional look, and I'm just going to start carving it out just a tiny bit to make the teeth and the mouth stand out a little bit better. So now that I have the outlines of the mouth pretty much dialed in, I'm going to start sanding it down a little bit and make sure that it's nice and smooth, because after this we are going to start making the teeth. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, this swim bait actually doesn't have too many details that really stand out in terms of carving, except, of course, the mouth and the gill plates, or gill flaps in this case. So that's what we're going to be doing next. The way that I decided to carve the gill flaps on this swim bait is exactly how I would do it with any kind of other lure that I carve scales into, where after I'm done, I'm not going to sand anything and just leave it angular, if that makes any sense. The downside to that technique is that you have to be very careful where you start and very careful where you end, and also these gill flaps kind of need to look like they belong there, which is not the easiest task to achieve because, like I said, you have to be very careful and very purposeful with all of the cuts you do. But it's a good way to learn how to carve properly. Now that I'm done with all of the other carving that I will do on the swim bait, it's time to move on to the most difficult part of the whole carving process, which is carving out the teeth. And I start by dividing the mouth in two, and I just do that by drawing a line across it. Alright, moving along. So, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the teeth. And I want to make them appear that they could interlock. I start the carving process by doing a single sweeping cut. And this is fairly easy to do because you're basically just cutting a line and you just have to worry about the angles themselves. So even the teeth are really small, this is fairly easy to do. Exposing the teeth that are as small and as delicate as these ones are is a little tricky, but definitely doable. You just have to take things nice and slow and be consistent with the cuts that you do. So, even though these hobby knives that I prefer to use for carving are great, they can't do everything. So, next what I'm gonna do is I'm going to use my Dremel tool to start going between the teeth. But I figured to make things a little bit easier for me, I'm going to actually black out the teeth so that I know exactly where they are and I don't have to worry about hitting those when I actually fire up the drill. Carving in between the teeth with a rotary tool or a pen drill can be kind of intimidating because the chances of things going terribly wrong is pretty high because you're moving in such tight quarters. And what I usually do to kind of help me mitigate the risk is to, first of all, anchor my elbows onto a table or any kind of stable surface. That way I limit the movements that I'm able to make and also stabilize the movements that I will be doing. And then little by little I've moved between the teeth and carve out the excess material. When I started to work on this wake bait, I decided that I would want to have a detachable fins for it, and they all would be detachable. You don't see those too often, and I really wanted to go all in with this swim bait and try new things out, because I've never done that before. But before I can do any of that, I need to draw where the slots are gonna be, and I'm gonna have to carve them out. I was debating on which of the fin slots I would show you guys how to carve, and I ended up with the dorsal fin slot. So what I do is I go around the border and cut roughly maybe 2 mm deep cut here, and then that'll be kind of my borders that I can start cutting out and carving out. You can think of this as kind of like a mortise slot for a tenon to go in. I think the easiest way to establish a mortise slot here is going to actually cut it out a little bit so that I have kind of a base to start on, and then I will just use my chisel to carve the rest out. That's how I usually do these things. At this point I realized that it would be a good time to separate the two halves from each other, so I would gain better access to that mortise slot. So I broke out my saw and let's cut this sucker in half. I also figured at this point it would be advantageous for me to make sure that the surfaces are nice and clean. So I gave them a little lick with the belt sander. So as you can see, I jumped ahead a little bit because I kind of forgot to film the part where I actually gouge out the hole, but you know what, you're not really missing much. But next what we have to do is have to establish the center line of where everything is going to be, which is basically the hardware. So determining where to start the joint connection and where to put the screw eyes, it's kind of tricky sometimes, and what I did here is I measured 1.5 millimeters from the bottom, and then in between those it's going to be just 1 centimeter, so 10 millimeters. And this is basically just an educated guess from previous swim baits that I've done, and I've noticed that this is a pretty good ratio to keep. And as you can see, I marked it on the other half as well. So next I'm going to tap them, give them a little bit of a starting hole, and I'm going to drill out holes on both sides, you know, corresponding holes and all that. Alright, so now that I have the screw eyes in place, I'm actually going to use them kind of as a guide to make sure that the holes on the opposite side are actually going to be lining up perfectly with these ones. So that's what we're going to be doing next. The mold that I plan to make will have these insert pieces that will actually come out from the mold, and you can insert them in there. I will show that a little bit later, but in order for me to do that, I need to mark here with this 3mm thick Lexan polycarbonate sheet, which will be the material that I will be using for those insert pieces. So that's why I'm using that as a guide. The easiest way to figure out the width of the slot is, of course, using the screw eye that you will be inserting into that slot. So that's what I'm going to be doing now. I'm going to use this to do little marks on both sides and placing the eyelet in the middle, so I will get perfect symmetry here. Of course, you could use calipers and measure the thickness of the eyelid, but who wants to do that? Machinists probably would. So this side of the wake weight will actually have the pin that will go through the body of the lure, and I'm going to mark out next where that's going to be. So this will be roughly 5mm from the edge of the lure. And since this is going to be a pinhole, it'll need a hole. So that's what I'm going to be drilling next. And actually, you don't have to go all the way through if you don't want to. You could, of course, but it's not necessary. So that's actually exactly what I'm going to be doing now. I'm not going to go all the way through. I'm just going to go roughly 1.5 centimeters in, and that should be plenty enough to hold that pin. Because remember, this is going to be a mold master, not the actual lure. Alright, next we're going to carve out those mortise holes for the insert pieces, which will actually be glued onto this piece, but on the actual lure they will come off. And I actually don't have to go really deep here. Probably around 5mm should be enough. These back pieces traditionally on swim baits and wake baits and any kind of bait that has a joint in it usually will have kind of a curved surface to it, or maybe just like a triangle. But I wanted to make this flat, you know, just to try it out, because I've never done that before. And what I've done here is I've marked on the side 5mm from the edge, and I've also drawn a line on the flat piece on the inner part of the back piece. and I will just use that as a guide, basically. Alrighty, once I was done with the carving, I just sanded everything nice and flat. And you know, I actually forgot to mention that there's actually a reason for this kind of edging out the back piece, or rounding it off. It will actually give you a lot more range of movement on the tail. So remember those fins that I made earlier? Well, they're gonna need a tab that will actually hold them in the swim bait. And that's what I'm gonna be doing next. Basically what it is, it's the same Lexan polycarbonate sheet, 3mm thick, and it'll be just a square that has a hole in the middle and a recess for the screw. So I start by tapping a small little divot into the Lexan polycarbonate sheet, and then I will use a drill bit that has a countersink head on it. Alrighty, next I'm going to cut the countersink piece out and try to make this as square as possible. And I'm actually not going to cut all the way through, because if I did, it might cause the piece to fly off or drop into the bandsaw, and I really don't want to deal with that, so this is the way that I decided to go about this. And I had to do this 4 different times. And after that, it was just a matter of sanding all of the pieces roughly to a shape of a square. And of course we're gonna have to do corresponding divots for these square tabs that will be going into the swim bait. So that's what I'm gonna be doing next. And the process of making the divot is exactly the same way that I did with the mortise slots for the fins themselves. So I'm just gonna go around the edge first, and then I'm gonna go from the inside and cut a small little piece out that way, and that will give me perfect edges, and then I will just use my chisel to gouge out what's remaining. Alrighty, now it's time for some super glue. And what we're going to be doing next is I'm going to tack that little square piece into the fin. And the easiest and most accurate way to do this is just to put a little bit of super glue into the fin. I already have that square piece in the slot, and I will just place the fin carefully on top of that, and hopefully I'm not gonna get too much runoff, because that would mean that the fin would actually adhere to the body itself, which is not what I want. I gave the super glue roughly 10 minutes to completely cure and harden, and the fin and the tab just popped out perfectly. Honestly, I could have not planned this any better. It's lovely when the plan comes together like this, and of course I did this to all of the other fins as well. One thing I actually didn't think about when I was starting to make the fins earlier, that I would need some sort of tab that would go into the body on the nose end of the fin, if that makes any sense. So I just glued an extra piece on it. Already early on in the project, I knew that I wanted to have the fins to be glossy. And in order for me to do that, I need to clear coat them, and in order for me to do that, I need to attach them somehow to a piece of wood or something like that. And my solution is I'm just gonna screw in some screw eyes. Of course, I need to drill holes in here first, and then I will attach these into another piece of wood that will hold them in place, hopefully. Like I mentioned earlier, I need to attach these into another piece that will be then clamped into my drying wheel, and hopefully it will stay stable and nothing will go wrong. Fingers crossed. But anyways, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to put screws on all of the screw eyes, and that will attach them into place. It does look a little flimsy and rickety, but actually this was surprisingly stable. The way that I decided to attach the piece of wood into my drying wheel is just to use these quick on clamps. Of course, I could have drilled it into place too, and I think that would have been even more stable, but I didn't think about that while I was doing this. And you know, oftentimes when you do these voiceovers later on, you're like, oh god, what did I do that for? I guess this was one of those cases, but it did end up working out pretty well. Oh, and by the way, the epoxy that I used for these fins is of course True Coat epoxy. It's honestly the best epoxy out there for fishing lures, and it does give you a really nice glossy finish. I end up adding 2 layers on these fins, and the end result is just magnificent. Alrighty, so next I'm going to start adding the hardware, which is actually kind of like a mock-up hardware, because obviously, like I said before, this is not the actual lure. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to drill holes to the places where I'm going to have the hook eyes and the line ties, which there actually will be 2 of those. So I've already made the hook and line ties, and I'm just going to glue them into place right now with some super glue. So if you still remember, earlier in the video I mentioned those insert pieces that will go on the back side of the lure that will house those screw eyes and the pin. So these are actually going to be kind of like mock-up pieces that will kind of make a cavity inside the mold that will then hold those insert pieces. Don't worry, it'll make sense a little bit later on, trust me. And here you can see that they line up perfectly with the screw eye holes, which is exactly what I wanted. Alright, so the next step is to seal the wood, and I'm using this Varathane clear coat to do that. And you kind of want to make sure that the surfaces of your lures are not glossy finish, because that will affect on the adherence of paint later on, or if you plan to use any kind of surface sealers, for example, it'll peel off a lot easier, and that's not what we want, right? So a couple of weeks before releasing this video, I shared on Instagram that I learned a new trick that I wanted to share, and this is actually one of them. So sometimes you might have a difficulty to making sure that your internal wire harness stays in place. So I'm just going to use these screws to make sure that the internal wire harness stays exactly where it's supposed to stay. This time around I'm actually not gonna show you how to make the mold from start to finish, so we just jumped ahead a little bit. If you want to see exactly how I do that, you can go and check out my previous video on the channel where I show you exactly how to make a awesome mold. And I use the same methodology on this one, so if you want to learn that, go and check that previous one out. Now I'm just gonna open the mold. The other thing I decided to skip on this video is how to make the mold for the fins. It's pretty much exactly the same way as I did the master mold. But now we're gonna move on to casting the fins. And what I have here is smooth cast 60D. It's a semi-rigid plastic, and we're gonna mix this awesome looking yellow into it. I could have probably just done the gray ones, you know, for the shark theme, but I wanted to make some crazy colors for the sharks as well, so that's what we're looking at now. One other thing I'm doing a little bit differently this time around, I'm actually going to inject this semi-rigid plastic into the mold with this syringe. And you can use any kind of syringe for this job, I think, as long as you have enough volume. I think I've shared this tip on the channel before, but I'll share it again. So I use baby powder to dust off the molds. This will make sure that the castings actually come off easier, and also it helps with the longevity of the molds as well. Alright, so ever since I've been doing these videos where I make a mold, oftentimes, or pretty much every single time, I've left out the part where I show you how to insert the internal wire harness inside the mold. Because, I mean, I think that's been kind of a trade secret, but you know what, I figured why not, I'm just gonna show you guys this time around how to do it. And it's fairly easy. I've already formed the wire harness, and I'm just going to place it into the mold and attach it with those little screws. And I've been talking about those insert pieces a few times already on the video, so these are actually going to be those pieces. The inner piece is rounded. It has to be rounded. If it's not, the piece is not going to come out from the mold when the castings are done. I've learned that the hard way. And also something that I usually do with these molds that have a lip on them. Of course, this is going to be one with a hidden lip slot, so I have a insert piece for that. Here we have a straight lip. But what you can also do is you can bend the lip. So that will give you different angles of diving depth. You can have a deep diving crankbait, or you can have a surface lure with the same mold. I think that's pretty neat. Okay, so let's close the mold now and we can start doing some casting. And usually what I do when I close the mold, I make sure that all of the parts are aligned properly and there's no bulging or anything like that, and then I just close it with some rubber bands, and these are pretty heavy duty ones too. Alright, finally we can start casting some baits. And what I usually use for my castings is Smoothcast 300. It has a fairly quick cure time, which is around 10 minutes. I usually leave it a little bit longer than that though, just to make sure that I don't rip anything apart when I open the mold. And usually what I do is I measure the A side first. Some people prefer to do the B side first, which is, you know, all fine and dandy, whatever works for you. I just do it this way. And just measure out the correct amount. In this instance, it was around 48 grams. And then I measure the equivalent of the B side, which is slightly less if you look at the formula in the bottle itself. And then it's just a matter of mixing them up with some microballoons. And the brand that I prefer to use for this is Smooth On again, and product line is called Eurofill 15. You know, just makes sense to use the product from the same company that makes the resin. And I've heard recently that Alumilite has discontinued their microballoons in the US and everywhere else, which is kind of a bummer, but you know, there's actually an alternative out there right now. It comes from this company called Sackpick Bait Company. I'm gonna put his company in the description, and he sells microballoons nowadays. And I've actually been testing it out, and I'm pretty impressed with the product so far. I feel like the end result comes out a lot more durable than it would with Eurofill 15. At least a little bit. I mean, I haven't actually done any concrete testing yet, but it does feel like it's a little bit more durable to me. Alright, once I've mixed the microballoons and the liquid plastic thoroughly, I'm just going to pour them into the mold. And you usually do need kind of a steady hand here if your pour hole is small, which mine usually are. Sometimes I have to make them slightly bigger afterwards, just to accommodate for my handshake. But you know, I've recently turned 40, so the shakes are definitely getting a little bit stronger now, which is kind of annoying, but you know, it is what it is. And you know, while I was doing the voiceovers for this section or part of the video, I was actually thinking, I wonder if anyone has ever done this with a syringe. That might work pretty well too. I mean, if anyone out there has done it, please let me know if it worked out, or is it if it was a horrible disaster too. I'd love to know. Anywho, I usually put a timer on my phone to track the time. I usually put around like 12 minutes. That's pretty much guaranteed to work out, and when I open the mold, I'm not gonna be greeted with a horrible mess. And yeah, I'm just gonna tear out the mold now, and let's see if we did good or not. And after the initial quick inspection, everything seems to be a-okay, and we can start taking some of these insert pieces out. And I start by pulling out the pin from the back piece and wiggling those insert pieces out. I forgot to mention that a really good way to make sure that your insert pieces actually come loose from the castings is to smear a little bit of Vaseline on them before you cast the lure. And the last thing to take out is the lip. And I feel like this part is really easy usually because the piece is a lot bigger than those small little insert pieces on the back end. And of course, since Lexan is kind of flexible but doesn't break, you can really put a lot of tension into it and try to force it out. Oh, by the way, remember those fins that I casted a little bit earlier? Let's open the mold and see what they look like. And as you can see, the injection went pretty much perfectly. And I think I will definitely be using this method a lot more in the future, because I think I'm going to be able to cast a lot smaller pieces than these. So at this point I've finished a whole bunch of these, and I've primered them and they're ready to be painted. And I figured I would go with kind of a natural look for these ones, at least for the painting portion of the video. I did make a few that are, well, not out of this world, let's just say that. But yeah, this is going to be a great white shark, and we're going to start with this kind of a gray color that's going to be mostly on the backside and on the half of the flank. And I want to go with this kind of like a scraggly line. I don't want it to be too straight or too artificial looking. And yeah, let's see what happens. Unlike usually in my painting portions on the videos that I do, this is going to be a very easy paint job to do. Basically, there's only going to be 4 different colors going into this particular paint job. And the next one is going to be this pink that I will use to highlight the mouth area and highlight the teeth. And I would like to point out that this area, the mouth area, has been clear coated with some polyurethane, and also the gill flaps, because I'm going to be using that washing technique where I paint pretty much all over the area there, and I will just wipe off the excess, and the paint will stay in those crevices and highlight the areas that need to be highlighted. Alright, so next we're going to do the gill flaps, and I didn't want them to stand out too much and kind of made them a little bit more stealthy looking, I guess. So the color that I chose is this concrete, which is kind of almost like a brown. And yeah, that's what I'm going to be using for these gill flaps to kind of make them stand out just a little bit, but not too much. Alright, so the last color going in, which I actually painted, so technically this is 5 colors, but I just painted 4 of them because the body is already white, so I kind of lied, but not really. But anyways, yeah, I'm just going to use this black to paint the eyes, and I have this template to help me do that accurately. Alright, so next we're gonna put on some epoxy, and I didn't actually want to show you the whole process because it's a little boring and you've seen it before. Instead, I wanted to show you how to deal with these joint parts, which can be a little bit tricky sometimes to get an even coverage on them. So what I usually do is I have the drying rack or drying wheel stationary, so it's not moving, so it's much easier to get in between the crevices here and get a nice and even coverage everywhere. After 3 coats of True Coat epoxy and a week of waiting, because you know, when you have a full-time job, it's a little difficult sometimes to find time for your passion projects or side hustles, you know. It's just one of those things. But anyways, now I'm just gonna start cleaning up some of the parts here, and we can start assembling this little shark. You know, this part probably would have been way easier if I didn't wait a week in between and start working on these pieces and cleaning them up. But it's not that bad. I mean, honestly, this is kind of a softer type of epoxy, so it could be a whole lot worse. The whole time I was working on these pieces, I kept trying them out and see if they would fit, because, you know, even though I'm pretty patient, when it comes to stuff like this, I'm a little bit too impatient sometimes, I feel like. But, you know, like I say before, it is what it is. Until it's not. That's what my wife says anyways. So for the lip material I chose Lexan polycarbonate. big shocker there. I know. Um, yeah, it just has a whole lot of durability, and the way that it's able to flex and just take a whole lot of abuse, it's pretty much perfect for a lip. And I did actually go through a couple of different shapes too, just to try it out and see if there's going to be any kind of huge difference between them. And honestly, I can't really tell if there is a huge difference between different shapes for this body type. But in the end, I ended up going with this kind of like a pick shape, you know, the pick that you use to play guitar. And I think that worked out pretty well. Alright, so now that we have the lip fitted and it seems to fit pretty well and looks pretty good, we can start assembling the rest of the bait, which is going to be the fins. That's the only thing that's left. And in order for me to do that, I will just use these small little screws to fasten them into place. But first, of course, I need to drill some holes for them. And I have to say, seeing these screws fit so perfectly into place, that is just pure perfection. And honestly, very satisfying, even if I say so myself. And I do. Next, I'm going to determine the range of motion that the tail will have. And in order for me to do that, I'm just going to have to tune the screw eyes. And I'm just going to actually screw them in. And I noticed for this particular wake bait, the perfect balance is where the threads actually start. So I'm going to go all the way in until the threads stop. Pretty easy. And honestly, kind of handy. So while I was making this bait, I had this great idea that I wanted to have the pin to be removable. So you could take that out and you can tune your baits to your liking. And I didn't anticipate that the hole that it's going to be on the bottom is a little bit too close to the hook hanger or the hook eye. So I can't actually put a screw in there, which I thought that would be a best way to go about it. If I would do that, I think it would probably break this part because it's so thin. So instead, I'm just going to glue it shut, and as you probably noticed, that I'm actually mixing some of that dye, white dye, and hopefully that will mask it a little bit better and make it look a little bit neater. I think this is definitely something that I need to address for future baits that I will be selling, and I want to have kind of a plug in the bottom as well. But maybe I'll just try to find small enough screws to do that job. I have no idea yet, but I'm sure I will figure something out. Once the epoxy and the dye had cured enough, I'm just going to go ahead and put those pins in. But first I need to measure how long the pin is going to be. So in order to go with my vision of having a removable pin that you can take out anytime you want and then do adjustments, of course I'm gonna need some sort of plug, and the easiest way to go about that I figured would be just to use a screw. Like I mentioned before, I wanted to have a screw in the bottom too, but that was not in the cards this time around. I just need to make some adjustments in the future models. Maybe there will be a version number 2 at some point, but yeah, this will have to do for now. And yeah. Alright, so I figured we would actually have a look closer some of the colors that I painted, and I think you might have noticed a few of them previously, but yeah, here is the color that I painted on the video, but just from different angles so you guys can see it a little bit better. And next we have something that kind of looks like an orca, but not really. But I think an orca was the inspiration behind this. Not really sure, but I really dig the color. It's very simple and looks mean. And the next color doesn't look mean at all. And this is inspired by Pikachu. And yeah, very simple, but I really dig it. Sometimes, you know, simplicity is beautiful in its own right. And keeping with that theme, here's something even more simple. Just plain white with some little details added to it. And of course I'm showing you guys these lures so that you know that these will be the colors that I will be putting on my website for you to purchase. And there will be some deep diving versions as well. And like always, I couldn't leave the video without showing you guys the action of the lures. And I will be showing you how the different line ties will affect the action. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like, comment, and you can also support me on Patreon if you want. Like for example, this video will be posted in there much earlier than it will drop on the YouTube for everyone to see. And there's gonna be a lot of goodies that I will be trickling into that Patreon account when I start making something new. You know, it's kind of like a behind the scenes kind of thing. But yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys on the next one.